Hey there, everyone. Good evening. Well, it's evening time here. Rare for me to be doing an evening video, but I was sitting outside in the backyard playing my tongue drum, and it was just so nice and breezy. Actually, it was a little windy, a little gusty, and I was thinking about my big oak tree that's in the backyard, who we've developed a bit of this relationship, and he really works with grounding me and supports me in remembering to anchor and stay settled. And I was thinking about stories and the stories of our lives. And I've done a blog post on this a little bit ago, probably a week or so ago, and really talking about not the stories of our pain and our suffering and the loops that we get into, which are of course important, but the stories that actually inform us without us even knowing as we go through our lives. They're like the breadcrumbs that are left that we can look back on and see the perfection of everything perhaps that has happened through that continuum, and even beginning to recognize and realize how I believe we're always being supported and guided by our soul wisdom that's in connection with divine source. And so I was thinking about trees. And what I was remembering was when I realized that trees had been a part of my journey consistently, probably since about 1996-ish, somewhere in there. Probably actually more like 97, 98. 96 is when I started going through my awakening process. And I was not an outdoorsy person at all. So in theory, I would love to be outside and I would love to be in nature, but the reality of it was that I was still pretty disconnected from the importance of that, the value of that, the relationship that can be developed from that. But about 97, 98, spending time up by Mount Hood in Oregon, the very first recollection that I had was the person that I was with at the time. We would go up to Mount Hood and go hiking and take the dogs up there and camp. And this one, I don't remember, we were going on a hike. And I really kind of would rather just sit and kind of hang out and be rather than like long hikes. But this one particular day, we were heading out, and there was almost like this magnetic pull over to this tree, kind of at the side of the path. And I had never really experienced anything like that. And I listened and I was like, oh, what is that? Right? Like, what is that? And why and how is this connection happening? Like, how am I being called over to this tree? And I went over and I could feel a shift even in, we'll say, the magnetics there. The energy changed, and I knew that I was supposed to be here with this tree. So I told my partner at the time, to go ahead and go on, and we hadn't gotten that far from camp, and that I would just meet him back at camp, or I would be by the tree. So he went with the dogs, and I sat by the tree, and I kept waiting, like, what's going to happen? What does this really mean? And I can't say that a whole lot happened at that time. But what I did recognize was that I felt really grounded and stable, and this deep sense of peace came over me. Then as I left the tree and went back to camp, it kind of faded away. And then in 99, perhaps it was, I did a vision quest through a conscious community that I was a part of. And we went out to the desert in eastern Oregon. We were going out there for 3 days, with our jugs of water and lemon. And we had to find our place, right? We all kind of dispersed. There was about a half dozen of us around this river and the cliffs, and we could go as far as we really wanted from base camp. And as I was walking up the trail over the river, there was this kind of jetting out narrow cliff, right? This like rock formation that kept calling me. And I became again really aware that nature was drawing me, was guiding me, was teaching me, was inviting me. And I got to the end, and it was like this kind of jagged cliff, and I was like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't. That's like, and it was on this sort of incline, and the message continued to be, right? I said, I'd say, well, how about if I put my bag up here a little bit, like away from the cliff, and instead it was like, no, you've got to be here. So I went ahead and listened, because by this time, I was a couple years in, and I was already starting to follow those promptings and listening to spirit. So I set up my bag, and there were some rocks that sort of created this area that I could rest my feet into on this incline as support. So it was a little unnerving, but I went ahead and trusted that, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. And once I finally settled in to my place, there wasn't much to settle. We had just a sleeping bag and a tarp in case it rained, or to put underneath the bag. As I settled in and got ready to sit for my meditation that night, I noticed that I was connected to this circle of evergreens. And there was one in particular, and I could feel that I was in a circle of grandmothers. And there was the one that was across the bank, across the river, just looming up, really large and beautiful and majestic and statuesque. And then I don't remember how many more, but then there were smaller ones, but still large, that kind of created this circle. And the reason I had to be out on this little jutted cliff was because I closed the circle. And throughout my time there for those 3 days, I felt very small, right? And I mean that not just physically, but I felt the youth of where I was at in my journey. I felt the innocence of the spiritual life that was opening up to me, and I felt that beautiful humbleness, that there was so much that I needed to learn, and that this beautiful circle of these evergreens were these grandmothers, and that they had invited me to come and be a part of this circle to gain wisdom, to listen. It wasn't until a few years later that I started to glean perhaps things that they were transmitting to me that I had no real idea of, or could grok it then, or could really feel or sense it. But I remember just the profoundness of their presence, and I could tell they were alive and they were teaching me something. So then, right, so the whole point is that I have had a relationship with trees without even knowing that that's what I was doing from those points on. Every place that I've lived, and I've lived quite a few places, um, I've always had my tree. And I would always be drawn to a specific tree wherever I was at. Or if I happened to have one in my yard, then I would form a relationship with that one if it were just one. But if it was more than one, it became clear that there was the one that I needed to be sitting under, in communion with, going out when I would read or I would do my journaling or any kind of studying. I would always pull out all my blankets and my pillows and I would sit under whatever that tree was at that time. And this has gone on. When I lived in Los Angeles, I had a tree up in Griffith Park that I would go and sit with because it was hard to find it in apartments, trees that you could actually spend that time with and were out of the way of the hubbub. So I had a tree up in Griffith Park that I would go and sit under and do my practice, and I have always tended to be a fairly quick, in Ayurvedic terms, we would say very vata person. Talk fast, move fast, think fast, maybe a little airy and spacey. And when I realized the power of the trees, part of what they were really offering me was to ground me, to root me and really connect my energy down into the earth. I have a very active higher centers, and my lower centers, particularly as years have gone on, have become less activity going on in the lower centers and more in the higher centers, so it's been a little imbalanced. But the trees have this beautiful power, willingness, desire to support us, to ground us into the earth, to connect us to our own inner root system, and to allow us in that way to find our stillness of center, right? That spine center. So what I think is beautiful about this is that life is always giving us living teachings, is what I call them. And the divine wisdom is always leaving the drops, the breadcrumbs along the way. And our role is, I believe, to pay attention, right? To pay attention to those stories that really connect us to our journey, to our soul's path. Find the themes, find the threads, find those, the colors and the textures of the tapestry that is our life, that are created by these threads of soul communication and divine communication. And it requires that intimacy, right? That deepening into the subtleness of our own life, those things that we might not be always attuned to, that require us to drop into deeper levels of reflection and sensing and remembrance. And then we find that life is truly magical. We are magical beings, unfolding and evolving with the assistance of everyone and everything around us. So as we're moving into, I've redone my website recently, so really starting to bring so much more of a focus after 2.5 years of deep integration and really grokking the year that I spent in Biomancy University and other studies as well, and doing my own communions with the earth, the stars, the elemental alchemy, all of this. The invitation is for many of us to connect more deeply to the planet, to the cosmos, to the wisdom that's waiting for us. And it actually does require us to become more willing to soften and understand the entanglement, right, in the quantum realms that are available for us, that are already existing, but those sacred entanglements are there to help and support us. And it's interesting because when I first moved into this house, I had a big maple tree at the front right here, and then I have the oak tree at the back. And when I was over at my last place in here in Tulsa at Shannonwood, I had this amazing tree that was like this portal. Literally, it was a portal for my telepathy that started to come online more. But it happened mostly with that amazing maple tree as well. So this maple tree that was right outside my window, there was this instant connection. We bonded. At night, I would just kind of lean back into her and settle into her roots, and that would help me ground and anchor, particularly after Moki's death and sort of the dramatic ending to my time at my last home that I loved dearly. But clearly I was not meant to remain there. So when we had the big storm last year, the maple tree came down after some of it had been damaged, and it was not healthy, so they took it down, and it was very painful. But one of the beautiful things was that just because her form isn't there, her ethereal energy is still there for me to commune with when I need to. I don't do it as often, it doesn't feel as obvious, and I don't turn to her in the way that I used to. And in the beginning, Brother Oak, right, who I used to call her Mother Maple, Brother Oak, in the backyard, he was a little standoffish, and it was fascinating to witness the personalities, the essence, the expressions that they had. So he, he just wasn't really very open or receptive, and I just honored that and, respected that, and was sort of like, okay, I guess this isn't for us. And Mother Maple was right here, and that was such a loving connection. And maybe it was after she was taken down, I started to commune with him and ask if we could begin to have some communication and connection. And what I found was that he became most open and willing during last year in particular, when there was just so much change happening, and I was very ungrounded, and my nervous system was on a continuation of activation from the prior year. But the biomancy was like anchoring me and grounding me and all of those practices. And he began becoming known to me. And I would connect and merge with his roots and just allow myself to be taken into his strong presence. And what's been fascinating is that even sometimes when I'm out and about and I'm feeling a little overstimulated, sometimes he will just appear and I can feel him in my field, and he's helping me to just relax and calm and come back into my center. So I know that there are many of you that probably know how this works and have been doing your own communions. I know many of you are nature lovers, probably more, have a deeper history with that than I do. And so you know how magical this can be. For those of you who don't, right, this is sort of the new frontier that is opening up for us. And I have a couple things that I've written on my blog about the importance of this, and we'll be doing more writings on it and talking about it. And opening up, you know, new sessions to work with this specifically. And that's also on my website. You can check that out at lotuslinley.net. So I just wanted to share and just encourage and remind us to remember the points in our path, those points in our life's journey that held profound moments, even if we didn't know what they were at the time. Those people, places, things, those connections that were made, those mysterious events and happenings, right, that we can only put context to it sometimes later down the road. Hindsight is 20/20, and begin to connect those dots. But it's this great reminder, like, oh yeah, we were never alone. You were always there, right? Always present, always supporting. So just know that we're always held, no matter what it looks like in this physical realm. There's so much more available for us, and this is what is opening up more and more through deeper relationship and intimacy to all of life forms and that which is both seen and unseen. So I'm going to leave you with that, the story of the trees and their wisdom and the different ways that they have served us and that we are also able to serve them. So thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful, have a lovely, whatever this is, day, morning, evening. Take care. Bye-bye.